Too many vegans. Here we go. Are we live? Yes, we are. Okay. Let's turn that down. All right. Well, I'm going to take a look at Lewis Bollard's TED Talk, which came out... Wait, this is the wrong one. This is April 2025. Let me find the right one. Has he done two of these? Oh, did he give it in April and it's only just come out? I think that's what's happened. Let me check. Yeah, I think he gave the talk in April and it's just come out now. There's a little bit weird that it says it like that though. Here we go, let's get the link from Lewis's LinkedIn. Okay, yeah, this is the same thing. Let's go.
And that's factory farming. But first, I want to share with you the story of how I came to be here. I grew up in New Zealand, and yes, today I want to talk with you about one of the most important moral issues we never talk about, and that's factory farming. But first, I want to share with you the story of how I came to be here. I grew up in New Zealand, and yes, we had a sheep farm. It was small, 100 acres of rolling hills, and the sheep would graze the hillsides by day and then retreat to the hilltops to circle up and fall asleep at night. That's me, ready to farm right after my picnic. The sheep ultimately went to slaughter, but I always felt like at least they'd lived good lives and had quick deaths. Frankly, if I'm ever reincarnated as a sheep, which as a New Zealander is not unlikely, I'd like to live their life. When I was a teenager, we traveled to Vietnam, and in the back streets of Hanoi, I stumbled into a live animal market. I still remember seeing the sight, stacks upon stacks of cages crammed full of animals of every species, trembling in fear, staring out at me in distress. I was shaken, but when I returned to New Zealand, I figured things were different. I mean, you can see the cows and the sheep in the fields. Still, I started to wonder how we treated the animals that you couldn't see. How, in particular, did we treat the pigs and the chickens? So I did what you did back then. I picked up a phone book, and I looked up some pig and chicken farms. And one by one, I called, and I naively asked if I could just come visit. And one by one, they told me no. They don't let anyone just visit. Finally, I got hold of a major slaughterhouse and connected with a farm boy. Let's call him Liam. Now, this slaughterhouse didn't do visitors either, but Liam and I bonded over sheep, and he agreed to get me in. Honestly, the slaughterhouse wasn't as bad as I'd expected. It was the state of the animals arriving there that shook me. I remember seeing pigs coming down off a transport truck, some shaking, some squealing, some limping in pain. Liam, I said, "Why are those pigs limping?" "Not my problem," he replied. So I looked into it. Before I tell you what I learned, let me say I'm not here to tell you what to eat. In fact, I don't think this should be on you as an individual consumer at all. You never chose factory farming. When the factory farms...
Maybe as an individual activist, or, once you're awake to it, I think, Lewis is not trying to put responsibility on individuals and it's going to talk about an institutional approach. I do think it's important to say that the institutional approach does depend on individuals being active to do that and receptive to it. But let's kick on.
Came in and replaced the old family farms. They didn't tell you they were doing it. They didn't relabel the meat as now from miserable animals. They labeled it as all natural and farm fresh. In fact, the industry has created an entire system to stop you from seeing how your meat is produced. They've even passed ag-gag laws in US states to make it a crime to record conditions in factory farms, which makes it all the more important that we see what they're trying to hide from us. So I'm going to show you images of 3 common factory farming practices. I deliberately didn't choose the most gruesome or out there practices I could find. These are everyday realities involved in the production of most pork and eggs globally. Here we go. This is the gestation crate. This is why the pigs at the slaughterhouse were limping. They were female breeding pigs who had been confined to crates like these, unable to walk or even turn around for their entire pregnancies. Once they gave birth, they were moved to slightly larger birthing crates, and then back into these crates to get pregnant again and again for years on end. A friend of mine who worked undercover at a pig factory farm told me the worst thing he has ever done was to force these pigs back into their crates after they gave birth.
Hey Samuel, good to see you.
They fought so hard not to go back in. This is a photo I took
Hey Kerry, how's it going? Nice to see you.
of a battery cage on an egg factory farm. Most of the world's 8 billion egg-laying hens, roughly 1 for every person alive on Earth today, are confined right now in cages like these, unable to so much as flap their wings. And this is a trash can full of live baby chicks. I honestly didn't believe this one when I first heard about it. It just sounded like comic book villain stuff. But it's real.
It does, yeah, I said this. I mean, can you actually think of something worse morally? We've created like the perfect suffering machine. We're going to dispose of animals which are by definition innocent, like day-old chicks, on a systematic, on an industrial scale. I don't think I can. It's hard to imagine something worse. It really is.
The egg industry has no need for the 7 billion male chicks born annually. So it kills them on their first day alive in this world,
I'm going to make a video about this, by the way.
typically by throwing them in the trash or into a giant meat grinder. I could go on, but don't worry, I won't. We're all done with the images. I'm guessing you're not a fan of what you just saw. And you're not alone. 88% of Americans told a recent survey that they think gestation crates and battery cages are unacceptable. Try finding any other issue that 88% of Americans can agree on today.
So true. Similar numbers for UK. We've got survey data which is not close, right? It's like 90% of people say that these practices are unacceptable. And yeah, exactly as he says, there really isn't that many issues where you have quite that much agreement. Here we go. This is what I'm looking for. This is our UK survey on the topic. We asked people whether they find these things to be acceptable. Removing calves' horns, castration of newborn calves, killing male calves. So we actually had even higher numbers for the cages. Look at that, 96% said not acceptable to keep pigs in tight cages where they can't turn around for weeks. Similar number, 94% said not acceptable to keep chickens in cages about as tight as an A4 paper sheet. But all of these really, I mean, they're all upwards of 75%. These are common, legal UK animal farming practices. Nobody thinks it's acceptable. It's remarkable.
It's not surprising, though. We, as a society, have already decided that animal cruelty is wrong. If you treated your dog the way that a factory farm treats their pigs, you'd be committing felony animal cruelty in most US states. And this isn't just about the animals. Factory farms, which densely crowd together hundreds of thousands, even millions of near genetically identical immune-compromised individuals, are the perfect breeding grounds for disease. They control these diseases with antibiotics, tons of them. In fact, even as we face an antibiotic resistance crisis in humans, we are feeding far more antibiotics to farm animals than we use in all human medicine. But antibiotics can't stop viruses, which is why we have a bird flu pandemic sweeping through America's factory farms right now.
Yeah, in the UK as well. This will trigger Paul Wood, by the way.
After I learned all this, I dedicated my life to ending the worst abuses on factory farms. And the good news is, I've seen more progress in the last decade than in all prior decades combined. On these three practices, we are close to a tipping point. Thank you. Take the gestation crates. Advocates have won bans on them in 11 US states, from California to Florida. The Brazilian pork industry, led by giants like JBS, is moving away from the crates entirely. Take the battery cages. Advocates have won promises from the world's largest supermarket and fast food chains to stop sourcing eggs from caged hens. McDonald's is now 100% cage-free in its US and Canadian egg supply, and Costco is nearly there too. 44% of US hens are now out of cages, up from less than 10% a decade ago. Or take...
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Sam. Does this mean that public opinion doesn't quite matter for change? We have public opinion on our side, but we just carry on anyway. I think what it is priorities, basically, when people come to vote. There can be near perfect agreement on something, but how many of these people will have this as a top issue that they're going to vote on, or even decide what to buy on, right? People are saying this is unacceptable, but literally are themselves just carrying on. I mean, part of that is down to ignorance, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff around just inertia, basically, which the culture very much facilitates. But yeah, I think in political terms, I think it's a prioritization thing.
Take the chick killing. Innovators have developed de novo sexing technology that allows the egg industry to only hatch the female chicks. Thanks to that, Germany recently banned the killing of day-old chicks entirely, and France and Italy are largely doing so too.
Yeah, that's a great bit of technology that's coming along. I'm going to make a video about that, in ovo egg sexing. We just have a way to completely remove the killing of the day-old male chicks, which, whatever you think about the rest of the process, is obviously fantastic news. There's an interesting thing that happens there as well, where you would think it's going to be some expensive technology to adopt, but because they grow so many male chicks that they end up, from the industry's perspective, wasted, they've had space in an incubator and stuff like that is, what costs them money. So they want to know for the, the breeder eggs as early as possible if they're going to develop into a male, so that they can save the space in their incubators, basically. I mean, it's obviously a, profit-driven motive from the industry's perspective, but it's nonetheless a good thing that there's not economic barriers to adopting the in ovo egg sexing, largely.
Other innovators are developing alternative proteins made from plants, algae, even animal cells, to meet the world's growing demand for animal protein without more factory farming. And yet, for all this progress, the problem overall is still growing worse. More animals are suffering at human hands today than at any prior point in our history. We raise and kill 210 billion animals globally every year. 210 billion. That's more than the number of humans who have ever lived on Earth. We are the only species to have ever inflicted so much suffering on so many other animals. But we are also the only species to have ever acted to protect other animals from cruelty. We are a species of animal lovers. It is core to our humanity.
There's going to be a vegan in the chat who knows a counter-example to that. Some sort of interspecies benevolence, I bet.
One day, humanity will end the worst abuses on factory farms. And when we do, our descendants will look back and ask what we did to help end them. So what can you do to help? You can advocate, donate, even devote your career to this cause. But if you do...
Give more, share more, do more. Vegan 2.0. Is it advocate, donate, and dedicate your career? Missed out posting on Twitter.
Just one thing, I ask this. Talk about factory farming. Tell
There you go.
the corporations you buy from, the politicians you vote for, that you expect them to adopt at least basic animal welfare standards. Tell your friends and family what you've learned about factory farming.
He's literally describing Vegan 2.0. This is awesome. Yeah, I mean, donate, share things on social media. We've been doing on social media, but, you know, IRL as well, as the kids say. And interact with companies who don't follow through on their commitments to improve animal welfare and stuff like that. It's Vegan 2.0. These are the things that... These are both the only things that individuals can do to meaningfully make a difference, and the absolutely necessary things that enough of us have to do to meaningfully make a difference. In debating Vegan 2.0 versus Vegan 1.0, in order to get to the vegan world, you need 100% of people to go Vegan 1.0. But you need maybe 5% of people to go Vegan 2.0. So yeah, I'm buzzing that he's literally identified the three things that we've been doing. Well, maybe he's going to say something else as well, we'll see.
Factory farming thrives in the dark, shielded by a cone of silence, ignored by our politicians, our media, and society at large. Its victims are voiceless. They need your voice. I was thinking about this when I was back in New Zealand a few months ago with our 3-year-old son Willie visiting my childhood farm. Willie's started asking what I do at work all day. He just doesn't understand strategic philanthropy to reform factory farming, no matter how many times I repeat it. So I told him, I'm trying to make the world a little bit more like that farm. We can have that world. Humanity has already amassed unprecedented wealth and power. Soon, advances in AI will make us more powerful still. And we will face a...
Hi, boss man. Hi, everyone in the chat. Like the stream, guys. Like the stream. We've got 10 people here. Buzzing.
choice, a test of our humanity. Will we use that power to factory farm ever more animals, or will we use it to end this cruelty? Humans are animals too. What separates us from the pigs and the chickens is our ability to make moral progress. We should use it. Thank you.
Standing ovation for Lewis Bollard. Oh, there's Cultivated Meat one as well, hey? From June last year. that was awesome. Um, it didn't. I didn't know that there had been such great strides made in the three issues that he talked about, the three welfare issues that he talked about in particular, which was gestation crates, battery cages, and male chick culling. That was really heartening to know that there really has been a lot of progress in that. Actually, I knew about the battery cages. There's a great graph that shows um, graph of cage-free eggs. Oh, look at that. It's on our world in data. Share of egg production that's cage-free. It was just 12% in the UK in 1996. And it's now 72% in the UK. It's only 34% in the US. Wow, that's quite a big difference. But even so, look at the rapid progress made. 2006 or 2007, only 3% of eggs in the US were cage-free. And look at that, it's quite flat for quite some time. And then 2014, I wonder what happened in 2014. This is like when the animal movement started hammering on this issue, I guess, in the States. So 2014, we're at 6% cage-free in the US. And then 2022, up to 34%. That is quite something, isn't it? 30% in less than 10 years. These are the campaigns that we are working on in Vegan 2.0. Are they often cage-free campaigns? Don't forget, a big part of the reason why this is a good thing. I mean, I do think it's also a good thing for the chickens who are no longer in cages, right? And, I know a lot of vegans will want to say, well, that's not enough and we need to do more and so on. And I think that's right. I think that is right. But it is still progress. If you're the chicken who's no longer in a cage, that's going to feel like progress. But the main thing that a lot of people overlook in this calculation is that also by imposing welfare standards of any kind, you're going to tend to make it more expensive to farm those animals, and therefore there'll be fewer farmed overall. So even if you're not a fan of the welfareist kind of approach here, know that it is also ending up with fewer animals being farmed also. Does Vegan 2.0 take into account the psychological barrier of preaching for something that's not practiced by the majority? Can hypocrisy become fatal to Vegan 2.0 strategy? I think you're asking about a case where somebody's doing the advocacy part, but they're not actually following a vegan diet, which is something that a few people have asked me about with Vegan 2.0. I think it is technically possible, but yes, I think you're right that it will tend to be a bit less compelling to be, if somebody is doing activism or posting about why you shouldn't eat animals and they are themselves eating animals, to the extent that people know that, it's going to be, presumably it's going to be less compelling, right? Although I will say that donating seems to be unaffected by that. You could well be eating meat and donating thousands of dollars to animal charities and, helping more animals than you're hurting. Again, I know a lot of people won't like that approach, but yeah, I think that I'm concerned about the sort of overall impact on the ultimate variable of animal suffering or rights violations. So we want to look. Well, I think of it in terms of suffering. But okay, this is good news. Gestation crates as well, he said. Let's have a look. Crates over time. I don't think there's going to be quite as neat a graph to show the change in gestation crates. What's this? Pixel person. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Cell mortality is significantly higher and annual pig production per cell significantly lower in countries where they still use gestation crates compared to the EU, where use of gestation crates is restricted to. Okay, so they're still using them to some extent. Interesting. Welfarefootprint.org. Don't recognize any of these names. All right, well, interesting to look at some of this stuff anyway. Okay, so there's a few things that we could look at next. All of them entail a good amount of reading. This one might be a bit heavy. I think this one would be interesting. This is an evaluation of how digital and mass media can help with meat reduction. And this is kind of an interesting thing to look at because for those who do prefer to be funding vegan activism and, you know, actually reducing the amount of animals being demanded, I think that this is an important angle to look into because, like I say, we are normally focusing on supply side, cage-free campaigns, welfare improvements and stuff like that through a lot of the vegan 2.0 activism that we do. You know, we share stuff on social media which is intended to encourage people to reduce their meat consumption as well. So I guess you could say this is in that category. Now, the interesting thing here, to kind of give away the punchline, is they found their estimate for the cost effectiveness of these digital media and mass media campaigns to reduce meat consumption was actually pretty similar in terms of the number of animals per dollar to the ACE recommended charities. We've estimated those to be around 4.2 or something like that animals per dollar. I think it's 4.4. And this report estimates 3.7 animals per dollar for these digital and mass media campaigns. That's an interesting question. From a philosophical point of view, are we saying that the rich can pretty much get away with murder, while those who can't give as much should take personal actions? It's an interesting way of looking at it. I mean, to the extent that there are wealthy people who decide to give a ton of their money to animal charities, that will be the main thing that I would care about in that instance. And again, it would be kind of surprising if somebody would do that if they weren't personally, at least, you know, woke on vegan ethics. But you could have a situation where somebody like Alex O'Connor maybe would, you know, be, for example, an ex-vegan, and they're going to maintain some interest in reducing animal suffering, and therefore they can donate or advocate for donating in sort of stead of that. But yeah, I can see how it gets dicey. I'm going to make a video about the Alex O'Connor thing. I don't know if he is actually donating, but he spoke about Shrimp Welfare Project in a video the other day. All right, let's take a look. Meat reduction. How much can digital media and mass media help? Should the animal advocacy movement change the amount of resources invested in digital media and mass media campaigns that aim to reduce people's consumption of meat and/or animal products? The animal advocacy movement regularly invests resources into campaigns that aim to reduce people's consumption of meat and/or animal products. Many of these campaigns are conducted using digital media, e.g. social media ads, and/or mass media, e.g. radio, TV, newspapers. In this report, we summarize the evidence on these campaigns. We conduct a cost-effectiveness analysis, drawing on the high-quality scientific studies that have been published over the past few years. This report builds on previous analyses of meat reduction campaigns, which have been published by various researchers over the past decade. Our cost-effectiveness analysis focuses on what additional funding could achieve on the margin, ignoring fixed costs that are already being paid by existing animal advocacy organisations. We address three main questions. These questions and our current view on them are as follows. What impact, depending on the quality of this executive summary, we might not read the whole paper. Maybe we can read parts of it. Number one, what impact might these campaigns have on the lives of animals? Given the scientific evidence we have available, our best guess is that these campaigns spare 3.7 animals per dollar. There is significant variance in our estimate. It's very possible that these campaigns actually have zero impact, and it is somewhat possible that the campaigns have an impact that is several times higher than our best guess estimate. Our best guess estimate is in rough agreement with the cost effectiveness estimated by previous researchers. Well, that's always reassuring. We erred towards the conservative side when producing our calculations, so that there are several important choices. There are several important choices we made with which reasonable researchers could disagree. Crikey, try saying that 10 times fast. Should the animal advocacy movement change the amount of resources invested in these campaigns? Based on our calculations, this campaign does not appear supremely cost-effective. On the other hand, the absolute impact of this campaign, 3.7 animals per dollar, is quite reasonable, and the evidence base supporting this campaign is quite strong. That seems quite reasonable, seems like an understatement. I mean, I can never believe the value for money when we talk about effective animal campaigning stuff. 3.7 animals per dollar. $1. There's nothing. That's how. Why do I spend any of my dollars on anything else? This is such fantastic value. And this is talking about diet change advocacy, by the way. So this is not like a welfarist approach. This is talking about digital and mass media for meat reduction. It's made 3.7 animals per dollar. That's unbelievably good value, is it not? Number three, could mass media campaigns in developing countries be a particularly impactful opportunity for these campaigns? Oh, that's an interesting one. We believe that radio and mass media campaigns in developing countries can justifiably form part of the movement's overall portfolio of outreach campaigns for meat reduction. However, we do not think it would be justified to put a disproportionately high amount of the movement's resources into radio campaigns in developing countries. Yeah, I've seen evidence before on radio campaigns in developing countries being a good method for behaviour change. I don't think it was on meat reduction. Could we create a win-win by jointly funding meat reduction campaigns with climate-motivated funders? We find that climate funders, at least the funders strictly interested in climate and motivated primarily by cost effectiveness, would not be keen to put large amounts of resources towards meat reduction campaigns, even as a joint initiative. Oh, well, that's not good news. The reason is that meat reduction campaigns appear to be a less cost-effective way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions than other options available to the climate movement. Yeah, I can believe that. Even if there are large amounts of carbon savings available from dietary change, it could still be the case that dietary change is very difficult to achieve to the extent that, you know, funding something else like electric cars or whatever it may be becomes better value from a climate perspective. I can believe that's the case. Our conclusions are based on our cost effectiveness analysis, in which we calculated the expected number of fewer animals farmed per dollar spent on advertising, animals per USD. We calculated this for each of 4 scenarios. We also produced rough upper and lower bounds to accompany our point estimates. The results are as follows. Best guess. This is our main scenario, and we think this scenario is the most likely of our 4 scenarios, about 45% likelihood. Under this scenario, we estimate that meat reduction outreach campaigns spare 3.7 animals per dollar. And there's a confidence interval of negative 0.7 to 8.7. So there is still a chance that such campaigns have a negative impact on the number of animals, somewhat paradoxically. Optimistic but still plausible. This scenario optimistically assumes that meat reduction advertisements are slightly more frequent than in our best guess estimate at convincing people to reduce their meat intake. We think this scenario is plausible but somewhat unlikely, about 10%. Let's read that again. Scenario optimistically assumes that meat reduction advertisements are slightly more frequent than our best. Okay. Frequent's a bit of a weird word to use there, but okay, more frequently convince people to reduce their meat intake. We think this scenario is plausible but somewhat unlikely, 10%. Under this scenario, we estimate the meat reduction outreach campaigns spend 9.1 animals per USD, with an uncertainty interval of 5.3 to 13.6. Okay, so they have a graph later on which shows the sort of relative likelihood of different numbers of animals saved. We'll have a look at that in a moment. So third of the 4 scenarios, optimistic and cheap and long-lasting, but still plausible. This scenario assumes a longer duration of diet change and a cheaper cost per engagement. We think this scenario is plausible but unlikely, 5%. Under this scenario, we estimate the meat reduction outreach campaigns spare 84.8 animals per USD, with an uncertainty interval from confidence interval from 50.1 to 127.3. So that's a lot. This is only 5% likelihood, and then we got 10% likelihood for 9.1. Again, the most likely scenario is saving 3.7 animals to the dollar. I mean, this is near, the optimistic one is nearly 1 cent per animal saved. This is disgustingly cheap, isn't it? I mean, come on. It's way cheaper to spare animals than it is to kill them. Number 4, pessimistic but still plausible. This scenario simply assumes that the effect of the intervention is 0. As Mathra et al. Argue, many of the diet change experiments are subject to various weaknesses, e.g. desirability biases. This means that a true effect of 0 remains a real possibility. We think this scenario is somewhat likely, 40%. Under this scenario, we estimate the meat reduction campaigns spare 0 animals per dollar. I think 40% is a little harsh for that. I'll be interested to see how they got there. That also, okay, I was thinking one of these was going to be some sort of backfire scenario. The uncertainty interval here does include negative numbers, which implies that there is some chance that more animals could be killed as a result. That would seem very unintuitive, and presumably the chance of that is pretty low. Overall, our best guess is that meat reduction outreach campaigns spare roughly 3.7 animals per dollar, but there is a really good chance, our gut feel says a 40% chance, that these campaigns have 0 impact. Okay, that's an interesting method. And there's a small chance, our gut feel says it's about 15% chance, that the impact is several times larger than our best guess. About 90% of this benefit comes from chickens and farmed fish. If you assume a typical lifespan of 6 weeks for chickens and perhaps a bit longer for farmed fish, our best guess estimate would correspond to roughly 5 animal months spared per dollar. That's an interesting Interesting metric as well. Animal months. Yeah, makes sense. Our best guess estimate suggests that meat reduction campaigns are somewhat less effective, about 1/6 as effective as what previous cost-effectiveness analyses have concluded. That's interesting. Okay, it said earlier on that they had similar results to previous estimates, didn't it? We'll have a look at the previous ones. Our analysis draws on stronger evidence base than some previous analyses. We also make some assumptions and choices that tend to err on the conservative side, so reasonable people could conclude that the point estimate should be higher than we have concluded. We emphasise that there is plenty of variance across our four scenarios that capture the possibility for a more optimistic view. Based on this analysis, we do not think there is much reason for the animal advocacy movement to invest a substantially higher amount of resources into these campaigns. Okay, that's a surprising conclusion. I guess they're saying that they found it to be less cost-effective than previous analyses. But as far as I can tell, this is pretty much on par with the number of animals per dollar that we expect from the leading ACE charities at this point. So it's kind of a surprising conclusion that they say there's not a reason to invest more resources. Again, I think this is fantastic value for money, right? 3.7 animals per dollar. And perhaps as many as 85 animals per dollar. I mean, come on. The movement will probably continue funding these campaigns at roughly the current level of investment for the foreseeable future, so it's probably worthwhile for the movement to fund a few more studies following the recommendations made by Mather et al. In the conclusion to their recent experimental report. In that report, Mather et al. Found that the existing studies may be systematically overestimating the effects of meat reduction campaigns, and they recommended that experimental studies be conducted in a way that measure actual consumption with a sufficient sample size while minimizing social desirability bias. I'm not gonna lie, we have a pretty good study coming out on this, where we got data from a data vendor which is based on the till data from supermarkets. And we ran social media ads in some parts of the country, which showed pigs, factory farmed pigs, and was encouraging people to reduce their pork consumption. And we did find lower pork sales in those regions of the country where we ran the ads, which is quite cool. That's under review at the moment, that paper. Yeah, I'll share this article in the chat. On the other hand, we've mainly discussed the evidence for one-off interventions. In these interventions, participants see a message or advertisement only one time. However, it is also possible for campaigns to use mass media with the intention of showing the same message to each person multiple times. Repeat exposure might have a larger effect size than one-off exposure. Okay, so, I mean, I think this is like fairly typical from what I've seen, where the results are quite impressive, and then the conclusion is not that, not as aggressive as I might think that it could be or want it to be. If I had done this and found, bloody hell, these campaigns spare 3.7 animals per dollar, I'd be shouting that from the rooftops. This is like quite a modest interpretation. I feel like they're underselling it, right? So we want to have a look at some of the previous ones, right? Comparison to previous cost-effectiveness estimates. Where possible, how long is this section? Quite long. All right, let's have a look. Where possible, we did our best to double-check our inputs and outputs against previous estimates of the cost-effectiveness of outreach on meat consumption. Again, these are not really independent, as many of these analyses were based on the results of studies that also form part of our evidence base. However, this can help us see whether our cost-effectiveness estimate is within the same ballpark as what has been calculated previously, or whether we came to a different conclusion. We find agreement between our estimate and previous estimates for the key output, the overall estimate of the number of animals helped per dollar spent on the intervention. Our overall point estimate of 3.7 animals helped per dollar is very similar to the magnitude of estimates that have been produced previously. Corresponding estimate from animal charity evaluators was between 3 and 10 animals per dollar. From animal charity evaluators again was 3.4 animals per dollar. From Wilderford was 3.1 animals per dollar. Okay, they are all bloody close, to be fair, aren't they? This one's got a bit of a range, but that is within the range. 3.7, 3.4, 3.1. Again, if I had done that, I would be shouting from the rooftops, right? Going, look how well this maps onto previous estimates. So again, that's kind of increasing my confidence in this as an approach. Likewise, our estimate corresponds to 166 animal days per dollar compared to the 120 animals days per dollar calculated by Tomasic. This means that we think our outreach for meat reduction is roughly as good as people who have analysed this campaign previously do. Nice. This all seems like good news. We find... Oh, I should probably change this to stream title, eh? Let's do this. Okay, so there's some disagreement on 3 inputs, and they end up at the same output. Interesting. Nice. Okay, let's have a look. We find disagreements between our estimate and previous estimates for 3 inputs. Cost per engagement. The only estimate in the table below. Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the things they talk about, Samuel. I can imagine that when a campaign is fresh in someone's mind, there might be a short period where change occurs, but how does it impact in the long term? Yeah. Duration of diet change, point 2. So look, cost per engagement. The only estimate in the table below that corresponds to online advertisements comes from the study by ACE. The original source for the cost per engagement in that study was ACE's evaluation of the Humane League's online advertisements for diet change, factory farming, and other topics. The spreadsheet supporting this analysis is available here, though the spreadsheet has since been updated for the 2023 analysis. In that spreadsheet, ACE calculates that the cost per person reached by THL's online ads are in fact either $0.007 or $0.345. These costs vary between the THL's campaigns. Okay, that's quite a big variance, isn't it? The cost that we use in our model, $0.03, somewhere between the two, based on the Facebook experiment detailed above, is well within this range. Therefore, we're comfortable using our estimate of 3 cents, despite the different estimates produced by ACE. Yeah, okay, that seems... Well, I mean, if it is this way lower one, that would make the impact way higher, right? Because they're going to be projecting from that. Therefore, how many people are you going to reach for $1? Okay, and then we've got percentage of people who intend to change their behaviour and duration of diet change. It's a bit weird to have these that way around, but okay. We use 1 year, increased to 3 years in one of our modelled scenarios. This parameter is subject to a large amount of uncertainty. The evidence for this input is pretty sparse. Some people think this input should be lower, e.g. a few months, and some higher, e.g. 3 to 4 years or more. I do think 1 year is low. If somebody does go vegetarian or vegan, the average, I believe, is between 4 and 7 years is the number that I have in my mind. Someone else has said between 2.5 and 6.5, so that's a similar range to me. We guess about 1 year, and we think anything lower than this is probably too pessimistic. We suspect that effects could even last about 3 years, but the evidence is too tentative to have a super high amount of confidence in this. Okay, so this is what I mean about the conservative estimates throughout, and that is generally a prudent thing to do if you're doing this sort of modelling. To take like lower end estimates, conservative estimates, say, oh, well, it could be up to more, but we're going to just say it's a year, even though it might well be 5 years or 3 years, right? That is a prudent thing to do because it, you know, when somebody goes and looks at your methods, as we're doing now, you kind of are more comfortable if they're saying, well, it's probably actually more impactful than they modelled, than if a critic was to say, it's probably way less impactful than you modelled, right? So that's why they do these kind of conservative estimates throughout. JLL et al. Show that effects can persist even after 3 years, though this study involved a long lecture rather than a short video. The meta-analysis by Mathra et al. Doesn't really show a decline in the effect over time, at least beyond the first 7 days. That said, the studies analysed by Mathra et al. Have at most follow-up times of only a few months. Similarly, the meta-analysis by Chang et al. Found no statistically significant effect of the follow-up time on the effect size. Okay, so that's saying that the whatever effect exists probably does last. When thinking about vegetarianism specifically, Animal Charity Evaluators concluded that the author's final 90% subjective confidence interval of the mean length of vegetarianism period for use in cost-effectiveness estimates of vegan advocacy, mouthful, is 2.5 to 6.5 years. The weakness of this estimate is that vegetarianism is different and involves more of a conscious and public commitment than simply reducing meat intake. Okay. This is where, again, I feel like it would have been helpful to have this percent of people who had changed their behaviour first, because now it wasn't really clear to me that they weren't talking about vegetarianism. Surely reducing meat intake also includes people who go vegetarian or vegan. Let's have a look. Percent of people who change their behaviour in response to the intervention. In our model, we find that the intervention causes about 4.5% of people who engage with the intervention, e.g. people who click on the ad, to change their behaviour. In contrast, Kaufman argued that expecting even 1% of people to change their behaviour because of the intervention is unrealistic. Our figure, 4.5% does seem high. 1 in 20 people who click on your ad are gonna change their behaviour. Although maybe clicking on the ad is already kind of a high bar. That's not 4.5% of everyone who sees it. It's only the people who click on it, which presumably you're interested to some extent already. Our figure of 4.5% is derived from applying our risk ratio of 1.09 to a baseline probability of 50%. This is explained in detail above. Okay, that must be one of the parts we skipped. The divergence in opinion here could arise from the fact that Kaufman was referring to 1% of people who are handed a leaflet. Well, we're talking about 4.5% of people who click on an ad, yeah. On the other hand, online ads will be less impactful than average when compared to all of the different interventions in the meta-analysis, many of which were quite involved, e.g. university lectures. The intervention causes 4.5 people who engage with the intervention. Okay, I guess that kind of could mean different things depending on what the intervention is, right? Somebody who either sat in the lecture as engaged with the intervention, or in the case of an online ad, clicked on the ad as opposed to just viewing the ad. Right, last little point here, and then they'd have a big table of other ones. Chance of the intervention causing an increase rather than decrease in the consumption of meat and animal products. Animal charity evaluators argued that advocating for people to reduce their meat intake has a decent chance of increasing chicken consumption. Specifically, they wrote that the estimated standardized mean difference from the meta-analysis was symmetrically distributed, with most of its probability mass on leaflets causing an increase in poultry consumption. We believe that this position is no longer justified. For example, the experimental study by Jalil et al. Found that when people ate less beef, they switched from beef towards veg rather than poultry and fish. Similarly, the meta-analysis by Mathra et al. Found that mean increases in meat consumption were quite rare, though this could mask instances where poultry increases but total meat consumption still decreases. They're talking about small body problem again there. but they're saying that it's likely not the case. Based on this study, people didn't switch to poultry and fish, which would be bad because it would be more animals being killed for the same amount of meat. But actually, they just switched to plant foods, which is good. Yeah, this study, I think they phrase it as evidence of backfire effects is rare. So a lot of people worry that there could be some sort of backfire effects where, this is the idea of like the people who are going to go and eat more meat now because the vegans upset them, right? Unsurprisingly, that's kind of rare that actually happens. People like that are eating as much meat as they want to. They are not going to force themselves to eat more meat than they really want to just to upset us. As much as they might promise that they will. Okay, I don't think we need to look at this whole table, but the main interesting part here then was just the extent of the convergence with the other estimates, right? They've estimated that these kind of campaigns save 3.7 animals per dollar. Another estimate's estimated between 3 and 10 animals per dollar. Another one 3.4 animals per dollar. Another one 3.1 animals per dollar. So really quite a clustered set of, darts thrown at the board there. And again, 3.7 animals per dollar. $1 that can't get you anything now. But it can save nearly 4 animals. So these were almost on the level of the kind of estimates that we see from the supply side animal charity evaluators interventions, to be fair. Which is kind of surprising, to me at least. Well, this is the graph of the different scenarios. Moderate chance that the true effectiveness is 0. Could be harmful, but we doubt it. Most of our credence is centered on 3.7 animals per USD. It could have a much higher cost effectiveness, but we doubt it. I mean, again, I think their model is very modestly constructed. They have used pretty much the... Oh, okay, no, I guess there's somewhere in between. Well, the duration of diet change, I think 1 year is probably too conservative, honestly. And there's a lot of other sources here saying it could be, 3 years, 2.5, 6.5 years. In which case, the animals saved per dollar would go to... if this went to 3 years rather than 1 year, it would go to about 10 animals per dollar, wouldn't it? Or over 10 animals per dollar, in fact. So the value for money in this stuff is just incredible. Let's see if there's any other sections of this that I want to have a look at. What organisations are doing this effectively? That'd be nice to know. Humane League. Let's have a look at the case study. A leading organisation that conducts vegan-vegetarian outreach through digital media campaigns is the Humane League. This digital media campaign is only one campaign among THL's many. However, Animal Charity Evaluators has conducted a detailed review of this campaign in particular. THL's Veg Advocacy Programme focuses on encouraging individuals to reduce their consumption of animal products. They're primarily focused on using online ads to engage individuals who might be responsive to animal advocacy messaging and then provide them with animal advocacy literature. After accounting for their budget, they do appear to have achieved a lot of reach with this program. Over an 18-month period, THL spent just over $1 million USD on its digital vegan vegetarian outreach campaign. During this period, the digital media campaign reached over 30 million people on social media and resulted in 1.3 million downloads of vegan vegetarian literature. Wow, okay, that's a good metric. So this is people who cared enough to not only click onto the ads, but also then download, the Go Vegan PDF guide or whatever it was. This would indicate that reaching one person costs about 3 cents, or that getting one person to download literature costs about 80 cents. Now, of course, a lot of those people who download the literature might subsequently never open the file or engage with it, right? but it's certainly a sign of intent. This is always a challenge in these kind of studies because it's more difficult than you think to observe people's food choices. Like getting the kind of supermarket sales data that we got for the recent. Oh, hey, Jeremy. Nice to see you. Yeah, take care. The supermarket data that we got for the social media study that I was talking about is very expensive to get. I think that cost about 15 grand, that spreadsheet. Yeah, most expensive spreadsheet ever bought. But yeah, that data is valuable, and of course, big companies can use it to evaluate their marketing campaigns and stuff like that. We did quite a cool study where we incentivized people to take part by giving them a voucher, which could be redeemed at a cafe, and they could redeem it for either a meat or a plant-based sandwich. And I think we had like serial codes on them or something like that. And then based on that, we knew some of the serial codes corresponded to having been in a presentation about plant-based foods, and some of them were, a control presentation. And we found quite a few. We found actually a big jump in the number of people choosing the plant-based sandwich when they had been in the intervention group compared to the control. So that was quite a cool, creative way of trying to get at like actual food consumption data. Which is another one which involved observation of residential waste containers, also known as bin diving, to see how many plant-based or dairy milk containers people had been throwing out. That was an interesting one. The campaign also achieved some broader accomplishments, though they are less relevant for our purposes. We have not corrected for these other accomplishments in the quick description of their costs and reach above, which means that this analysis is actually slightly biased against THL. Okay. So there's like other effects which were not directly related to people reducing their meat consumption. I wonder what that would be. Social media ads about trying to get people to download vegetarian and vegan literature. I can't imagine what other accomplishments that might have, but fine. Hey, Rebecca, good to see you. Yeah, for sure, Rebecca. No, they'll be doing like paid ad campaigns aimed at non-vegans. And actually, social media advertising is very good to target you very specifically. Your favorite social media platform probably knows that you're vegan or whether you're vegan. And so when you're running these campaigns, you can pretty much leave out vegans quite precisely, depending on the platform. But yeah, no, these will be not to their existing followers who, as you say, would be mostly vegetarians and vegans already, right? THL is a large organisation and is a well-established part of the animal advocacy movement. We chose THL for this case study because of their status as a top charity as judged by animal charity evaluators. For these reasons, we would expect that a new animal advocacy organisation established to work on digital media campaigns may experience less reach than THL does currently, particularly as the new organisation scales. Nevertheless, if we assume that reaching people on social media does cause people to eat less meat, then the case of THL shows that investing in digital media may be a cheap way to have a large impact on the lives of animals. Yeah, I mean, I can't help feeling they've undersold this review overall. Their main estimate is for saving 3.7 animals per dollar, and it could be much higher, like almost 1 animal per cent in their most optimistic scenario. But in any case, their main scenario is pretty on par with the number of animals that we expect to save on the sort of supply side interventions that we're often doing with the ACE campaigns, with the ACE charities. So THL could be one to fund then. They have this paragraph here at the end of this section saying basically they would assume that THL does this better than, some other new organization could do it. Which Yeah, I think they've given a reasonable justification for that, right? If they're proficient in these other ways, it's likely that they're also proficient at this task. Okay, I think we'll leave that one there. And got a few things that we could have a look at next. Let's have a look at this cultivated meat research briefing by the Vegan Society that I contributed to. So this is actually me and another vegan researcher, Corey Lee Wren, writing sort of opposite each other in the Vegan Society magazine. Or no, I guess this is a special thing about cultivated meat, right? It's not in the magazine, but we're writing opposite each other on the topic of cultivated meat then. And this is interesting because these are both from a vegan perspective, so it'd be quite interesting to read through this and see what people in chat or what people in my community think about this. You'll find out. You'll see what I think about it. All right, I'll read Corey Lee Wren's piece first. Then I'll read my response afterwards. I'll try to resist the urge to comment as we go. I might fail on that ambition, but let's see. The Vegan Society has rightly raised concerns with the continued physical violence that in vitro development entails, including using cultures from non-human animals and other forms of vivisection. Sociologically, however, it is important to recognise the symbolic violence that cultured meat sustains. Here I suggest that the feminist movement has much to offer. Many have suggested that prostitution and realistic sex dolls are ethical alternatives for men who wish to own, control, exploit and abuse women, supposedly reducing their desire to enact violence on others. Aside from dehumanizing prostituted women, this logic masks the fact that such an approach effectively normalizes the ownership, exploitation and commodification of women. Encouraging products and services that mimic or contain systemic violence only supports a culture in which violence is enjoyable, acceptable, and for sale to those in power. The normalcy of speciesism and sexism, incidentally, is clearly demonstrable in the fact that these debates about capitalist solutions to develop analogous consumable victims are engaged at all. We would never, for instance, encourage white supremacists to enjoy themselves with AI-generated slavery as an ethical alternative to white supremacy. I mean, this is like basically talking about video games, which I don't think... Okay, oh, we are talking about video games. We never encourage teens to take pleasure in video game simulations of school shootings as an ethical alternative to real-world mass murder. That's basically Grand Theft Auto, isn't it? We intuitively understand that these symbolic acts of violence could have consequences for people of colour and children. Women and other animals in today's culture, however, remain so objectified that non-profits and venture capitalists collaborate to profitably continue this objectification, albeit masked in language of ethics and scientific advancement to resonate in a woke and sustainable 21st century. Yeah, I mean, Corey Lee Wren's criticism is very much the symbolic angle. And as you'll see, my responses, well, not response, I shouldn't say responses written at the same time, but my view on this is very much a practical one. As you know, you might not be surprised to learn. While the symbolic ramifications of further commodifying animal flesh creates serious misgivings, it also remains the case that in vitro meat completely overlooks the billions of other non-humans raised in the food system who are not directly slaughtered for their flesh. For that matter, in vitro technology also does nothing for the billions of oppressed animals who suffer in non-food related industries. Dairy cattle, veal calves, wool-producing sheep, layer hens and racehorses, for example, all go to slaughter when their bodies become spent and inefficient. And what of leather and fur? In vitro meat does nothing to reduce the demand for animal flesh used in fashion. What of rodeos, zoos and circuses? In vitro technology is totally unrelated. These animals will not be spared by lab-grown meat. Veganism as an ethic, philosophy, and political vision considers humanity's oppression of other animals holistically. In vitro meat development, alternatively, is better suited to creating wealth for shareholders by globally expanding animal protein in the human diet. Right, well, this bits I actually do pick up in my response. I mean, this is, I don't know, it's always a red flag for me when there's these kind of things, which is like money's necessarily bad, basically. I'm not that convinced. I mean, this criticism is basically cultured meat doesn't solve everything, which, yeah, no, it doesn't. But wouldn't you rather have fewer animals being stabbed to death while this other stuff's going on? Indeed, I argue that most. I mean, this is the big green button thing again, isn't it? I always say, you know, if we have the big green button to make everyone go vegan and end all of it tomorrow, then great, give it to me and I'll press it. But if we don't, then let's do what we can. Indeed, I argue that the most glaring shortcoming of the in vitro scheme is that it overlooks species' attitudes and institutions as problematic in of themselves. I have my response is really good, by the way. Bearing in mind, I also hadn't seen Corey Wren's. In vitro meat purports to meet the supposedly insatiable public demand for non-animal human flesh, but this is a demand that is artificially controlled by industry. And I'd also question that. I mean, people do like eating cheap meat. It's, you know, sure we're marketed and stuff like that, but, you know, you can't just create a load of demand for a product that nobody wants. By reducing the cognitive dissonance that consumers experience in grappling with the suffering, death, and considerable environmental pollution their food choices cause, in vitro meat may further fuel the normalcy of speciesism and meat consumption. Well, but if it's not coming from animals, then what's the problem if the meat consumption continues? In vitro meat will become the next happy meat, allowing consumers to retreat into industry-led myths that the flesh comes from humanely treated animals. I mean, but if it doesn't actually come from a living animal, I mean, it would be wrong. It would be bad if people said that, but it actually did come from a killed animal, right? But I don't think that's what we're talking about here. Indeed, it is likely that consumers will be completely unaware of the institutionalized violence that remains in the production of in vitro meat. Yeah, again, she's making some assumptions about what in vitro meat production would entail there. Producers will employ similar tactics to those they currently employ to block public knowledge of the non-human experience. The consumer awareness and ethical discomfort with speciesist consumption that the vegan movement has been building for more than a century will be necessary for real change. I mean, I agree with this sentence, but it's just not mutually exclusive with also using technology to displace meat production. I agree with the sentiment. More importantly, this individual level work must be coupled with challenges to oppressive social institutions. Okay, fine. From a human perspective, in vitro meat is also deeply problematic. There is already a thriving industry of healthy and tasty plant-based products, including those that convincingly mimic the flavour and texture of animal flesh. Oh, I should change the title again, hey? Because consumers are aware that these analogues are plant-based and not of animal origin, they do not threaten to reinforce speciesism to the same degree that in vitro flesh might. Yeah, this is, I thought, another bit that wasn't so strong, honestly. The whole thing about objectifying animals and sort of normalizing that, you know, eating meat is fine and all the symbolic stuff that she's talking about over here could also be said of plant-based meat. Now, she says that they don't reinforce speciesism to the same degree. I mean, I don't know if that's the case. Must we emphasize furthermore that animal protein is toxic for humans, and the effort to globalize animal protein heavy diets is rooted in colonialism, racism, and classism? All right, I'm significantly less woke than quite a few vegans, I think. Let's article on cultivating. Normalizing in vitro flesh. Oh, pardon me. Let's. Here we go. Sorry, just bringing the stream back up. Normalizing in vitro flesh will aggravate serious diet-related public health crises, disproportionately harming vulnerable human communities that lack the resources and infrastructure to cope. Vegans should not be promoting toxic products, especially when healthier, more affordable alternatives are available and have been available before Western capitalism began to privatize land and undermine traditional food production across the globe. Okay, again, I don't know. I mean, there's so much in there, right? Who knows how affordable food would have been in relative terms before Western capitalism, right? I mean, how many hours would it take to produce? How many hours worked per calorie? You could do something like that. I would guess that it's going to be a lot less today than it has ever been. The more practical response to ensuring world nutrition would be a governmental investment in plant-based food security, a strategy that vegans can support. I mean, again, I'm for that. There can just be more than one thing happening at once, right? And there will be governments investing in plant-based food systems. There will be companies doing cultivated meat. This stuff's going to go on. It's just, I think, not that helpful for vegans to be anti-cultivated meat. I'm not saying that you have to eat it, right? No one's going to make you eat it, but I think it's good for our ends, right? And we'll see my response to this in a moment. As a sociologist, it's my position that vegans should be skeptical of campaigns that purport to solve the inherent problems of free market capitalism with yet more free market capitalism. In vitro meat may be palatable for venture capitalists, but is unlikely to create meaningful social change for non-human animals. I mean, how? I think it is pretty meaningful change if we kill fewer of them and eat cultivated meat instead. Capitalism aims to exploit materials and labours for the purposes of reducing input costs, increasing efficiency and creating surplus value. It's not designed to liberate. Instead, it has a well-documented history of objectifying, commodifying everything and everyone in its pursuit of that profit. In vitro meat should remain outside the remit of vegan advocacy. Okay, so I do address a lot of like the anti-capitalist sentiment in my response. Actually, honestly, I can't remember if I had already seen her piece when I wrote mine. It kind of seems like I might have done because it's very to the point of what has been said in the previous point. So here's me. Here I make the case that those who prioritise reducing farmed animal suffering should support cultivated meat. In particular, I respond to two common vegan objections to cultivated meat, the speciesism objection and the capitalism objection. So it's super on the money for what the other person was talking about. First, I will caveat that I support cultivated meat to the extent that it reduces animal suffering. But there are some versions of cultivated meat which use fetal bovine serum and actually require more animals to be slaughtered. Clearly, these versions do not reduce animal suffering, and I do not advocate for them. Some versions of cultivated meat require a tiny fraction of the number of animals, but still not zero. Some versions of cultivated meat truly demand zero additional animals to be used or slaughtered. In my view, these versions are far superior to meat from animals, and the latter, in my opinion, is vegan. So first, the speciesism objection. I'd be interested to know what you guys think about cultivated meat also in the chat. No, I don't think so, Oppenheimer. I don't see your previous messages though, so maybe they did. But post again. I'm looking at chat. The speciesism objection. Some vegans object to cultivated meat on the grounds that it perpetuates speciesism and promotes the idea that animals are appropriate for consumption, even if it reduces animal suffering in practice. I have two objections to this. First, this puts the moral weight on the attitude rather than the outcome. There is one reason that I care about people having less speciesist attitudes: to reduce animal suffering. Less speciesist attitudes only matter if they lead to actions that reduce animal suffering. Other than this causal chain from speciesist attitudes to reducing animal suffering, I have no concern whatsoever about speciesist attitudes. To illustrate this, let us consider four types of people: those with or without speciesist attitudes, and those who do/do not eat meat. Table below. So we've got attitudes here and actions here. We've got the non-speciesist people and the speciesist people. And then we've got the people who don't eat meat and the people who do eat meat. So A, vegan, right? Non-speciesist attitude, doesn't eat meat. Good attitude for animals, no animals harm for meat. B, we've got plant-based. So this is somebody who has speciesist attitudes but nonetheless don't eat meat. Then we've got C, the self-aware meat eater, who ostensibly has non-speciesist attitudes but does in fact still harm animals for meat. And then we've got D, the regular meat eater, who has a bad attitude to animals or species attitudes and eats animals still, right? So A, B, C, and D. When considering these four types of people, vegans can agree that A is better than D. Compared to the regular meat eater, the vegan does not eat meat and does not have speciesist attitudes. So this is the vegan compared to the regular meat eater. In my view, it is also clear that B is better than C. Compared to the self-aware meat eater, the plant-based person might have the more speciesist attitudes, but they are not harming animals for meat. From the animal's perspective, would you rather that somebody had a negative attitude towards you but left you alone, or that somebody had a positive attitude towards you but killed you for food? My second argument against the speciesism objection is that as a matter of human psychology, it is likely that cultivated meat will decrease speciesism, not increase it. This is because speciesist attitudes both cause and are caused by consumption of animals. Study participants who were given beef jerky to snack on, as opposed to those who were given nuts, subsequently ascribed lower mental abilities and pain capacities to cows. Eating animals literally caused the participants to be more speciesist. If cultivated meat can facilitate people eating less meat, it is likely that it will also facilitate a shift to less speciesist attitudes. Defences of eating meat are motivated by a desire to keep eating meat. How many people would try to justify killing a cow if there were no implications for whether or not they could continue to eat cheeseburgers? So that was my first thing on the speciesism objection. We've got the point about the attitude is less important than the actions, right? So the plant-based person who has speciesist attitudes is still going to be better morally than the self-aware meat eater. And then we've got the point about whether this would in fact, or what effect this would in fact have on speciesism. So, you know, Corey's taking the view that if we were to have cultivated meat, it continues the commodification of animals and that, you know, it reinforces speciesist attitudes. I'm saying that no, this is going to be a way to enable people to eat less meat from animals. And once they start doing that, less speciesist attitudes are going to follow from there. So, I mean, it's an empirical claim, right, about whether or not attitudes would become more speciesist in the world where cultivated meat exists. So I guess we're disagreeing on that. So that was the first thing, speciesism objection. The second one is the capitalism objection. We've got another table here. Some vegans object to cultivated meat on the grounds that it's made by big companies that are primarily driven by profit and may not really care about helping animals. I have two objections to this. I'm thinking that I must have seen the other person's point, or I'm just so well briefed on the objections to cultivated meat that vegans tend to have. There's the speciesism thing, the capitalism thing. Some vegans are like very hung up on naturalness as a concept. A lot of vegans have the idea that just there shouldn't be too easy an answer. Subsequent generations would have to suffer to the tofu stall like I did, something like that. I don't know. But anyway, the capitalism objection. First, it's not clear that cultivated meat companies do not care about helping animals. The people who own cultivated meat companies, as well as the people who work at cultivated meat companies, are disproportionately vegetarians or vegans. This includes the investors who put money into impact-driven funds like Stray Dog Capital, Sentient Ventures, and New Crop Capital, individual investors such as Jeremy Collar and Jim Mellon, who are lifelong vegetarians, and the CEOs of many of the biggest cultivated meat companies, including Uma Valletti of Upside Foods and Josh Tetrick at Eat Just, who are vegans. Second, the question of whether cultivated meat companies care about helping animals is largely irrelevant. What is relevant is the impact of their actions on animal suffering. Again, we can consider 4 scenarios where a cultivated meat company does or does not care about helping animals, and does or does not displace demand for farmed animals. Table below. So again, we've got the attitudes and the actions here. We've got the companies that care about helping animals or don't care about helping animals, and then we've got the companies that displace demand for animals or don't displace demand for animals. So that gives us A, altruistic and effective, so they care and they're doing a good job. B, selfish but effective, so they don't really care about animals but they're still doing a good job of replacing animal meat. C, altruistic but ineffective, so they do care but they don't manage to displace meat. And then selfish and ineffective, so they don't care and they don't manage to displace meat. Again, we can agree that most ideally companies would both reduce animal harm for meat and sincerely care about animals. A. At least ideally, companies would be both selfish. Oh, sorry. And least ideally, companies would be both selfish and ineffective. D. Least ideally, yes. It was a bit of funny wording from me, but fine. However, if we had a choice between B and C, surely we ought to prefer the selfish but effective company B, which does not care about animals but reduces animal harm incidentally, over the altruistic but ineffective company C, which cares about animals but lacks the capacity to do anything about it. So this, I'm basically saying it doesn't really matter whether or not they care. What matters is whether they actually succeed in getting animals out of the food system. Here I have responded to two common vegan objections to cultivated meat. Cultivated meat is likely to decrease speciesism, not increase it, and cultivated meat companies care about animal suffering, as demonstrated by the disproportionate number of vegans owning and running them. In any case, the outcome of reducing animal suffering is more important than the attitude of caring about animals for both the companies and for the general public. It is true that some versions of cultivated meat are absolutely not vegan. Other versions, in my view, absolutely are. Other versions still may not be perfectly vegan, but nevertheless can spare millions of animals from slaughter. There are some versions of cultivated meat we should not support, but refusing to support any cultivated meat, particularly on the basis of the speciesism objection or the capitalism objection to which I have responded here, is misguided and is likely to increase animal suffering. Well, there you go. I was basically just wondering if you were able to look at the small body problem at all in the study you mentioned you have in review. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, that one that we have with the supermarket data, we were doing pig adverts, eat less pork adverts. And we do have data for both pork sales and overall meat sales. I believe that in some of our analyses, there is a little bit of evidence that there could have been a small body problem incurred there, whereby, our adverts were focused on pork specifically. And to the extent that nudged people towards chicken or fish, you might be coming into the small body problem, right? But I believe that overall our analyses there were positive in the direction that the studies worked. And I think there's an analysis that controls for... you can tell I don't know all the details of these, right? I'm kind of supervising these, but not super close to them. There's one analysis that controls for political bias. We ran the ads in like the most left-wing and the most right-wing parts of the country for interest. And then we did one analysis that paired them basically with control left and right wing areas where we didn't have ads, but they did have sort of similarly anomalous political leanings. And then in that analysis, we found that our ads tended to reduce overall meat consumption as well, which is good. But yeah, that study's in review at the moment, which means that it could take a week, it could take 2 years. Well, no, it couldn't take a week. It could take probably realistically a month at the least. Okay, cool. That was a ride. I enjoyed this. What do you guys think about cultivated meat? Do you agree with my brutally pragmatic view, where the outcome really is fewer animals die, that means it's good? Or are you more inclined towards Coralie Wren's sort of sociological, symbolic perspective, whereby this type of commodification can reinforce speciesism and so on. I mean, I'm very proud of this piece, I have to say, because it's very unapologetically pragmatic, which I appreciate in activism. Okay, there's a few things that we could look at here. This is quite an interesting one, actually. Let's do this. This is another thing that I wrote for the Vegan Society. I can change the stream title again just a little bit. Effective animal campaigning. So I wrote this in 2019. And we're going to see, well, it's kind of a long piece. We might not read it all, but a lot of this is also just graphs and things that we can look at. So let's get into it, hey? I'm very happy to publish this review with the Vegan Society. Animal advocacy organisations with limited budgets may not have time to dedicate to this type of advocacy research, whilst academic researchers with an interest in animal advocacy research might find such work inappropriate for publication in academic journals. Nevertheless, research on effective animal advocacy is vital to ensuring that we can help as many animals as possible, and it is excellent that the Vegan Society is providing a platform to share this kind of work. This is the year before I started my company, which I mainly did so that I would have somewhere to publish my stuff like this and not have to be invited by Vegan Society or others. Oh, hey, Haz, good to see you. In my view, reducitarian or single-issue type efforts need to appeal to people's self-concept identity at some level in order to truly serve as a stepping stone towards disavowing more use eventually. Interesting. Yeah. That's kind of like so I had a point in there about the study where people are either given beef jerky or nuts, and when they're given beef jerky, they assign lower moral status to a cow afterwards. That's very much this motivated reasoning pattern where, your beliefs determine your actions, but also your actions determine your beliefs. And if you're eating animals all the time, it's going to make you have more negative views of them. So I think it is likely to go something like that. I think that's what you meant, Hans. Okay. I reviewed foundational and empirical research from a number of sources associated with effective animal advocacy. I identified a number of strategies for alleviating the most animal suffering possible through consumer-facing advocacy. Campaigns should focus on farmed animals, and especially chickens and fish, which suffer more and in far greater numbers than other animals. Animal cruelty messages appear to be more effective than health or environment-based messages on aggregate, though other messages may be also effective for some consumers. This vegans will like this. This is good news, I feel. Or, well, I mean, from the perspective of what works as kind of neutral news, I guess, but vegan advocates who are using animal cruelty messages and images will be pleased to know that these are generally the most effective things to be talking about, as opposed to health or environmental issues. And where there's a bunch of studies that compare this, which we'll look at. Advocates should be wary of messages which might nudge consumers away from red meat and towards white meat, since this would lead to more animal suffering. While some demographics, women, young people, left-leaning people, and I said left-handed people, city dwellers, are more receptive to vegan advocacy, the optimal strategy is likely to be reaching as many people as possible. There is mixed evidence on the effectiveness of leafleting and online adverts, and some evidence suggests that documentaries are likely to be the most compelling medium. So that was my little summary. Introduction. This is a guide to effective vegan campaigning. The aim is to present the research on effective vegan advocacy in order to help the reader create the greatest possible change in consumer behaviour. This means that for each dollar or hour the reader spends on consumer-facing campaigns, more animal suffering will be spared. The development of this guide is based on the principles of effective altruism. It's worth noting that consumer-facing campaigns are likely not to be the best use of animal advocacy organisations' resources in terms of reducing animal suffering. It's likely that a focus on institutions rather than individuals, such as legal and corporate policy reforms, is more effective. Sentience Institute. Oh, I guess I won't read all the citations. Hopefully, many animal advocacy organisations will also run campaigns to. However, many animal advocacy institutions will also run campaigns to persuade consumers to reduce their animal product consumption, regardless. I might moderate this now. I mean, I'm not going to actually change it, but if I were to write it again, I might have moderated this, given what we've just read on the Animal Ask website about the cost effectiveness of mass communication campaigns, right? So this is probably more cost effective than I was really giving it credit for at the time. Indeed, this may be an important part of their strategy, and in the long term could create not only more vegans, but more animal advocates. Look at that, I was already thinking about Vegan 2.0 back in 2019 when I wrote this. Therefore, this guide will focus on how to create the most persuasive consumer-facing campaigns. This guide is based on academic and advocacy research, primarily sourced from Animal Charity Evaluators Research Library, Faunalytics Animal Tracker, Humane League Labs, and Mercy for Animals. These were kind of the big four organisations that were publishing research on animal advocacy at this time. There's a couple of others now, including Bryant Research, of course. It will cover advocacy strategy, message content, which consumers to target, and what media to use. So we're starting with strategy, then we're going to talk about message content, who's the most receptive, and different forms of media. Strategy. It's important to make active decisions about what areas to focus on because this determines where we allocate resources. Of course, we want to help all animals, but given limited resources, we need to prioritise. Every dollar or hour that we spend on helping cows is a dollar or hour that we cannot spend on helping chickens. Yeah, I might also have moderated that if I were to write it again, given that there seems to be not that persuasive evidence for the displacement problem. I think, reducing meat could be helping both of those animals, I guess, is the point. By carefully choosing which problems to focus on, we can maximise the suffering we alleviate with a given amount of resources. 2.1, focus on farmed animals. This is a great graph, guys, to show how neglected farmed animals are compared to other groups of animals in terms of charitable funding. In addressing animal suffering as an issue, we face a choice about which areas to focus on. We might be concerned about animals in labs, in shelters, or on farms. As shown here in the graph on the right, about 65% of donations to animal charities in the USA go to animal shelters. Right, so this is donations. We've got about 2/3 going to shelters. This is other. I'm not sure what is entailed in other. And then I think about 1% or about 2% are animals on labs and animals on farms. However, as shown in the graph on the left, the vast majority of animals, about 99%, are on farms. And I will say as well, this didn't include wild animals, right? Which we're working on wild animal suffering here. Whilst only a tiny fraction are in shelters or labs. This is a relatively neglected area since just a small fraction of donations to animal charities go to farmed animal advocacy. Moreover, it's a tractable problem. Progress can be made to reduce the number of animals on farms and the extent to which they suffer. Therefore, farmed animal advocacy is by far the best use of resources to reduce animal suffering. Animal Charity Evaluators recommends farmed animal advocacy as the area most worthy of our attention and resources. Now again, I think they might be sympathetic to wild animal stuff now also. According to Animal Clock, in the UK each year we kill 1 billion chickens, about 15 million turkeys, about 14 million ducks, 14 million sheep, about 11 million pigs, about 3 million cows, 876 million fish, and 4.4 billion shellfish. So this is the graph with fish and shellfish included. Fish are over 2/3 of all of those, shellfish, sorry, over 2/3 of all of those animals killed. Fish, about another 14%, and chickens, about 17%. If we look at just the land animals, 95% chickens. So this is the small body problem. This is the number of animals, right? If you look at the quantity of meat, I think we do eat more chicken than beef and pork, but not by that much. So yeah, it's obviously disproportionately high number of animals because small animals, right? It's difficult to comprehend the true scale of any of these numbers, but displaying them graphically can help us appreciate the proportions between them. Here we see that the vast majority of land animals we kill are chickens. Chickens account for almost 95% of all land animals killed in the UK. When we include fish, we can see that fish and shellfish are killed in vastly higher quantities again, as shown here. Here we can see that fish and shellfish account for 83% of all the animals killed. Together, chickens, fish, and shellfish account for more than 99% of the animals killed. This is largely because they're relatively small. While one cow yields around 200 kilograms of meat, one chicken yields just 2 kilograms. Therefore, one must rear 100 times as many chickens to get the same amount of meat as one cow. It is true that cows live for much longer and therefore endure more suffering than chickens. Beef cows typically live for 395 days, whereas broiler chickens live for just 42, according to Tomasic. However, even accounting for these differences, chickens account for more than 90% of the days of suffering of land animals. Moreover, there's reasonable evidence that chickens and pigs suffer a great deal more than cows in typical farming conditions, though this is not straightforward to quantify. Norwood and Lusk rated the welfare of different animals on a scale of -10 to +10, where negative numbers indicate a life not worth living. They rate beef cattle as +6 and dairy cows as +4. Broiler chickens are rated at -1, and pigs and caged hens are rated at -5. These numbers are based on USA practices, but chickens and pigs still suffer more than cows in the UK. That's interesting then. They were rating the cows as net positive, life worth living. This is why Paul would always want us to talk about cows, right, in our debate. I had in mind pigs, which are rated at -5, life not worth living at all. There's also an argument to be made that some animals may be more sentient than others. Tomasic considers the argument that their larger brain entails greater capacity for suffering. One may take the view, therefore, that smaller animals, such as chickens, suffer less than larger animals, such as cows. This is difficult, perhaps impossible to verify, though interestingly, Tomasic controls for this and still finds that fish and fowl suffer more per kilogram of food produced than other animals. Accounting for the number of days of an animal lives, how bad their living conditions are on average, how much meat or other product they produce, how bad their death is, and how sentient they are, Tomasic estimates the following equivalent days of suffering per kilogram of animal product demanded. So you can see it's very high for, again, small-bodied animals, basically, right? Farmed fish is the highest. Battery cage hens, chicken, turkeys. And then we've got pork, beef, and milk, barely registering on the scale for milk and beef, certainly. Although there is some inevitable uncertainty in these figures, the differences are vast. To the extent that campaigns focus on specific products, they should focus mainly on reducing demand for fish, eggs, and poultry. Campaigns against dairy, meanwhile, are unlikely to alleviate much animal suffering, mainly because the number of animals involved is far lower. Moreover, dairy is one of the most difficult foods for non-vegans to give up, so these campaigns may be less likely to be effective. All of this leads us to the conclusion that reducing consumption of chicken and fish is a much more effective way of reducing animal suffering than reducing consumption of beef and pork. In fact, some diets which seem to be sympathetic to vegetarianism, such as avoiding red meat or being pescatarian, likely cause more animal suffering overall if they include more chicken and fish. Therefore, we should be wary of encouraging reduction of red meat, since this may result in more animal suffering overall. How are we doing, guys? How are we getting on with the long read? We've got 9 people here. This is pretty, decent numbers relatively for me. I was looking myself for info on effectiveness of different advocacy methods a while back and instantly found this article. Oh, nice. Nice, Oppenheimer. Yeah, I feel that. Message content. So this is section 3 now, right? The first, okay, yeah. So the first one was strategy. Now we're going to talk about message content. This is probably the main interesting part, in my view, anyway. When designing messages to persuade the public to change their diet, some messages may be more effective than others. Given that the cost of a billboard or an online ad is fixed, we want to publish the most persuasive messages in order to reduce animal product consumption as much as possible with limited resources. Focus on animal cruelty. One of the most common questions in modern animal advocacy is whether to focus on animal cruelty or to focus on environmental and/or health arguments. There is very good evidence to support a focus on animal cruelty. Several studies have found that people who are shown an animal cruelty argument are more likely to report an intention to reduce their animal product consumption than people who are shown an environmental or health argument. Humane League Labs has studied this several times. In one study, they varied the design of a vegetarian leaflet given to 3,000 people in the USA and then asked them about their dietary intentions. Amongst other variations, half of the leaflets focused on an animal cruelty message and half focused on a health message. Those who read the animal cruelty message spared 3.27 animals on average, whereas those who read the health message spared 3.94 animals. In a second similar study, Humane League Labs showed 3 different pamphlet pages to a sample of 784 Americans. One focused on an animal cruelty message, one focused on an environmental message, and one focused on a purity or abolitionist message. Of those who saw the purity message, 27% intended to reduce their consumption of animal products. This figure was 41% for those who saw the environmental message and 51% for those who saw the animal cruelty message. Abolitionist seething at that one. I mean, yeah, I'll have to look at more the what the messages actually entailed, but it looks like this kind of vegan or nothing message, you will get a lot of people going for the nothing. Whereas if you talk about animal cruelty in general, you might get some people kind of on the way doing reducing and stuff like that, right? Similarly, Faunalytics tested 4 different videos focused on either animal cruelty, animal individualization, environmental arguments, or health arguments. This is an interesting one, animal individualization. I've seen a few people suggest this as a strategy, right, where you really talk about the experiences and the personalities of individual animals. They found that the animal cruelty produced the highest percentage, oh, missing word there, animal cruelty video, should say, produced the highest percentage of people considering eliminating animal products, followed by the animal individualization video, the environment video, and finally the health video. Interestingly, this was almost the opposite of the video in terms of engagement. Most people abandoned the animal cruelty video before watching the whole video. This points to an inconvenient fact in animal advocacy. Shocking images of animal cruelty are the most effective at inspiring change, but many people actively avoid such images. For more on this, see section 5 on media. We've got some good solutions there. Tiplady, Walsh and Phillips found that pity, sadness and anger were typical responses to animal cruelty footage. Nonetheless, advocates should not shy away from using shocking images of animal cruelty. Whilst the industry routinely pushes back on animal advocates, often attempting to erode their credibility, Scudder and Mills found that a particularly graphic campaign by PETA against a corporate farm act effectively eroded the credibility of the farm and increased the credibility of PETA. However, advocates should employ caution with the framings they use. In focus groups with non-activists, Mika found that comparison of animal agriculture to rape and slavery would not play well with the public. Similarly, Bongiorno, Bain and Haslam found that PETA campaigns using sexualized images of women decreased viewers' intentions to support the organization. There's some evidence that perceived cuteness plays a role in willingness to eat animals, though images of cute animals are not particularly effective at inspiring dietary change. There is one exception to this. Mercy for Animals found that comparisons of farm animals to companion animals is an effective means of encouraging people to reduce their animal product consumption. This type of content is found to be particularly effective on social media. This is likely because it breaks down the dissociation between meat and animals. Kunst and Horgestad found that the ability to dissociate meat from dead animals played a significant role in willingness to eat it. This was especially the case for consumers in highly developed countries where truly unprocessed meat is rarely seen. Likening animals to humans is also effective, though crucially, likening humans to animals is not. That's an interesting distinction. I'd forgotten about that. So basically messages which say, look how intelligent look how intelligent animals are, and how reflective, or how they look after each other, or whatever it may, aren't they like us, can be effective. But it's not so appealing when you say we're all just animals after all, although still true, right? Yeah, it's all about framing. Animal cruelty messages seem to be the most effective at inspiring dietary change on aggregate, though this may not be the case for all consumers. Survey data bears this out. Humane League Labs asked a large sample of vegans, vegetarians, meat reducers, and some omnivores what their initial motivation was for reducing animal products in their diet. Amongst vegetarians and vegans, 44% said the environment was a primary concern, 50% said their health was, and 66% said animal welfare. However, the opposite was true for meat reducers. Among meat reducers and omnivores, 55% said health was a primary reason, compared to just 30% who said animal welfare was. This may indicate that the optimal strategy consists of multiple different messages aimed at different audiences. Health messages may be most useful for encouraging a certain set of people to reduce their consumption of animal products, but again, we should be wary of pressing the message, reduce red meat consumption, since this will likely be displaced by chicken or fish, causing more suffering overall. Yeah, I would probably change this if I went back as well, because it seems there's certainly not enough evidence of the small body replacement problem for me to have said that it would likely be displaced by chicken or fish. So the evidence seems to suggest that these things do correlate positively, such that if you reduce consumption of one, you're probably also going to reduce consumption of the other, and rather just replace it with veg. It's worth noting that many of these studies focused on a younger audience, either by design or incidentally. Pribis, Penchek, and Grajales found that younger people were significantly more concerned with animals and the environment, whereas older people were significantly more concerned with health. This may account for some of the higher receptivity to animal welfare arguments in these studies. It is also thought that consumers' motivations for reducing animal product consumption differ in terms of their subsequent rate of relapsing to an omnivorous diet. Yeah, I've seen more evidence on this since. Though thorough research on this topic is lacking, Thornalytics found that an astonishing 84% of vegetarians and vegans eventually go back to eating animal products. Common factors amongst ex-vegetarians and vegans include a lack of social connections to other vegetarians and vegans, transitioning to the diet too quickly, and food cravings. Given that there are 5 times as many ex-vegetarians and vegans as there are current vegetarians and vegans, further study on retention may be warranted. Yeah, I remember the lack of social connections being a really big thing emphasised in this Thornalytics study. This is why I think that things like this are very cool. We've got a little vegan community going here. Come and join the Discord as well. We've got dsc.gg/ChrisBryantPhD. I think it's really important to get yourself into vegan communities, and that if you tend to do that, I need to put an HTTPS on there, don't I? If you tend to do that, you will increase the likelihood that you're going to stay vegan for longer. There you go, that link works to the Discord now. A 4th study by Humane League Labs illustrates the importance of considering which products consumers reduce. They tested the efficacy of pro-vegetarian pamphlet pages focusing on A, animal cruelty only, B, health benefits only, C, animal cruelty, health benefits and environmental benefits, or D, health and animal cruelty messages. Okay, so we got animal only, health only, all 3, health and animal. A bit of a weird combination, but okay. They found that pamphlet A, animal cruelty only, led to the greatest proportion of people intending to reduce their animal product consumption. 52.3% who saw this page intended to change their diet, compared to 33.7% who saw B, 46% who saw C, and 41% who saw D. However, when asked about which animal products they would reduce, those who saw page A said they would be most inclined to reduce their red meat consumption and therefore spared the least days of suffering. They spared on average just 92 days of suffering, compared to 139 days for those who saw page B, 154 days for those who saw page C, and 178 days for those who saw page D. This illustrates the importance of focusing on poultry, fish, and egg consumption and presents advocates a challenge: how to motivate consumers to reduce these products in particular. Humane League Labs found that leaflets that only featured pictures of chickens were significantly less persuasive than leaflets which also featured pictures of other farm animals. This is probably because people perceive chickens and fish as less sentient. Mercy for Animals asked people to rate animals' intelligence, ability to feel pain and pleasure on 0 to 10 scales. The results are shown here. So we've got chimps and dogs basically rated very high on all of these things. And then pretty much the order is the same for the rest of them. We've got pigs less than that, cows less than that, chickens less than that, fish less than that, and plants basically 0, right? Now this is people's perceptions of their ability to, of their intelligence, ability to feel physical, mental pain and pleasure. But as you might expect, right, people are, out of farmed animals, people are most sympathetic to pigs, then cows, then chickens, then fish. So in terms of, you know, what you're putting on your posters, this is why we did the pig ads for that social media experiment that I mentioned. Higher belief in sentience for each creature was also correlated with lower consumption of their meat. It appears that most people intuitively think that pigs and cows have richer experiences of life than chickens and fish. Interestingly, we also see a bias towards dogs, with many people rating them as more able than chimps to feel mental pain and pleasure. Plants, meanwhile, are rated consistently lower than one might think when debating omnivores on the topic of plant sentience. A bit of banter from me in the middle of this article in 2019. The concern is that a focus on chickens or fish is ineffective in inspiring dietary change, but a focus on other animals such as cows and pigs could lead to more animal suffering if there is a substitution effect. However, vegan outreach found that people who newly avoided eating mammals were also likely to avoid eating chickens. Rather than a replacement effect, there was more likely to be an effect of reducing all meat consumption and consumption of other animal products. Therefore, messages which focus on different farm animals are likely to lead to a reduction in chicken consumption also. Okay, good. I do have a bit about that. Humane League Labs investigated which photos of farmed animals are the most effective at inspiring dietary change. The study varied the content of the photos: sick or injured animals, confined animals, dead or dying animals, or happy animals. The species: pigs, poultry, cows, or goats/sheep. The grouping: individuals, small groups or large groups. And age: adults, babies, or adults and babies together. So there's a lot going on here, right? They've varied a few different things in this study. The study found that the photo content had the largest effect on intentions to reduce animal consumption of animal products. Photo content. Okay, so sort of what was happening in the photo to the animals. Photos of sick or injured animals were the most impactful, followed by photos of animals confined in small cages. Dead or dying animals were next most impactful, and happy animals were least impactful. In terms of species, photos of pigs were the most impactful, followed by poultry, cows, goats/sheep, and finally fish. That's interesting to see poultry high up that list. But again, pigs most impactful, no surprise there. The effect of groupings and age were the lowest, but it appears that large groups were the most impactful photos, and photos of mother and baby animals together. Some of these findings are likely intuitive for advocates. Photos of pigs are more impactful than photos of fish, for example. Most people say fish is more difficult to give up than meat, yet this poses a problem for advocates who are concerned about animal suffering, since fish are killed in greater numbers and their production entails greater suffering. Mercy for Animals investigated which issues the public cared most about with respect to farmed fish welfare. They found that water quality was the most important issue for consumers. Compared to other issues, this issue made people more likely to sign a petition to improve fish conditions, most likely to reduce their fish consumption, and most likely to avoid restaurants which condoned each practice. A little bit funny wording again from me, but I think hopefully it's clear. This may be because people thought poor water quality could affect them personally if they consumed the fish, compared to other less compelling arguments like overcrowding and handling. Health messages. We do have a good comparison table in here, which we haven't got to yet. Where's that big comparison table of all the different studies? That is in another paper, I think. I'll show you that one as well then. Okay, health messages. While studies have shown that animal cruelty messages are the most effective at inspiring dietary change overall, there are some consumers for whom environmental or health messages will be more effective. Therefore, the optimal messaging strategy will address these issues as well. In particular, health messages may be more effective for older people. As well as asking about primary motivations, Humane League Labs reported that the main concerns of those who said health was a factor. The most important concerns were reducing the risk of disease, followed by avoiding contamination by antibiotics, hormones and disease, energy or well-being, and finally losing weight. Therefore, most health messages should be primarily framed around avoiding disease and contamination. This is likely because these aspects of meat trigger a disgust reaction. A recent study found that disgust-oriented messages were more effective than health-oriented message, and at least as effective as animal welfare messages. Therefore, portraying animal products as disgusting, i.e. contaminated with diseases, hormones and antibiotics, is likely to be an effective strategy for health-conscious consumers. That's a nice little insight. Do you think focusing on pigs might risk alienating a Jewish and Muslim audience? Interesting question. Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't do it if you were doing a campaign in a Muslim country, right, where they don't eat pigs already. I think that would... Well, it's an interesting one, right? Because you have, like, Hindus not eating cows because they are revered, but that is not the reason for Muslims and Jews not eating pork. That's more like, this is a dirty animal, and it's more... they'll, like, still have pretty poor attitudes towards the animal, right? Even though they don't eat it. Interestingly, there is some evidence that the way these benefits are stated affects how effective the message is. Bertolotti, Cicciariglia, and Catalani, Italians I would guess, find that the factual statements, e.g. a diet with a high content of meat is bad for your health, are more effective than pre-factual statements, e.g. if you follow a diet with a high content of meat, your health will worsen. This was true for health content, however the reverse was true for well-being content. Statements such as if you follow a diet with high content of meat, your psychophysical well-being decreases, were more effective than statements like a diet with a high content of meat is bad for your psychophysical well-being. Okay, that's a little bit of a weird diversion there. But okay. I wonder why it would be like that. Psychophysical well-being and health kind of seem like the same thing to me, but okay. There's probably a pretty modest effect, I imagine. Again, there is potential to cause more animal suffering as the message is not executed with care. On the whole, consumers perceive chicken and fish as healthier than pork and beef, especially since red meat is now widely associated with some forms of cancer and other health problems. Therefore, health-conscious consumers may be inclined to replace their red meat consumption with white meat consumption, causing more animals to be killed. I was really into the small body problem at this point, hey? I'm talking about that quite a lot. However, there's evidence that white meat, particularly chicken, is more likely to carry bacteria such as Salmonella and E. coli compared to red meat. Indeed, the most common food poisoning bacteria are most prevalent in chicken, particularly Salmonella and Campylobacter. Some studies have found the majority of chickens carry Salmonella due to contaminated feed and intensive rearing methods, while others have found that up to 1 in 10 chickens in major supermarkets has been affected by Salmonella. Here, we've got rates of bacterial infection for different types of meat. We actually don't have Salmonella on here. But okay, this is basically like a good argument if you are trying to get particularly health conscious people to reduce consumption of chicken, which they perceive as a healthier meat. It's also the meat most likely to give you food poisoning, right? That's a good one to have in your back pocket. And I remember from eating meat when that was a thing, right? You have to wash everything down after you've had raw chicken in the house, right? So yeah, leaning into that, I guess, is a good way to overcome that small body problem with respect to health arguments. This represents an opportunity for animal activists, given that the risk of diseases, 42%, and avoiding contamination, 36%, are the two most motivating health-related concerns for meat reducers. Activists should press on the key message that chicken in particular has a high risk of contamination. This could counter the trend of consumers predominantly having health concerns about red meat and encourage health-conscious consumers to also cut the consumption of white meat. Environment messages. How are we doing, guys? Still with me? We've got 12 people here, not bad. Although studies have shown environment-based messages to be less effective than animal cruelty-based messages, the environmental benefits of abstaining from animal products appear to be more readily accepted by the media. These messages are likely to be more appealing to a younger audience. Overall, the environment was less commonly cited as a motivation for reducing meat consumption compared to animal welfare and health. Less commonly cited as a motivation. Okay. In a review of 38 studies, Hartman and Segrist found that the majority of consumers are not aware that meat production and consumption has a negative impact on the environment. They found that many consumers thought other aspects of food, such as packaging and travelling a long distance, had a more negative impact. However, there's some evidence from one study that awareness of the environmental impact of meat may be growing over time. Oh, that is the fields, isn't it? When you're doing some sort of vegan advocacy, talking about the environment, and people say, "What about plastic packaging?" I don't have numbers on the scope here or the scale of each, but it's negligible. Most of the impact of food production is what they say before it leaves the farm gate. Right? It depends on what the food is and how it's produced, more so than food miles or plastic packaging. Right, these things just not as impactful. Nonetheless, there is some evidence that messages about climate change lower meat consumption intentions. In particular, a focus on the morality of engaging in pro-environmental behaviours is more effective than highlighting personal benefits. Postmess et al. Found that messages about greenhouse gas emissions were more effective than messages about saving money in motivating drivers to keep their tyres inflated. Okay. That's kind of surprising to me, to be honest. I would have definitely thought the environmental benefit is going to be less important than the saving money benefit to most people. I certainly don't think you can generalize this in the way that I appear to have done here. But okay. Again, this is a delicate issue with regards to animal suffering. Whilst beef and dairy cause high levels of greenhouse gas emissions, chicken and eggs are relatively innocent with regards to emissions. However, the latter products are associated with more animal suffering, therefore reducing red meat and dairy consumption is sensible from an environmental perspective, but if these are replaced by fish, chicken and eggs, overall animal suffering will increase. Okay, so that was the animal cruelty, health and environmental message sections. Now we've got this point about focusing on how to change. It's about message framing, then it's on to groups. We can do this, guys. Like the stream. Don't forget to like the stream if you're in chat. I appreciate you guys being here. Drop a like. All right, let's go. Animal advocacy messages typically focus on the areas described above: animal cruelty, health, and the environment. Interestingly, most UK meat eaters are already convinced that cutting out animal products brings about these benefits. In a survey of 1,000 meat-eating adults in the UK, 72.7% believe that vegan diets are ethical, 69.3%, nice, believe that they are good for the environment, and 50.3% believe they are healthy. Beliefs about vegetarian diets were even more positive. true, Oppenheimer. Rethink priorities estimates for sentience of farm animals. Okay, that's interesting. The problem, it seems, is that people are unwilling to change their diet despite these benefits. The same survey found that just 24.5% thought a vegan diet was tasty, just 22.5% thought it was affordable, whilst only 9.2% thought that it was easy. Other evidence supports the view that taste and convenience are major barriers to moving towards veganism. The 2017 survey of UK meat eaters found that enjoyment of meat was by far the most commonly cited reason for not being vegetarian. Humane League Labs also found that taste was the most common barrier for those who don't want to go vegetarian, whereas for those who want to go vegetarian but haven't, the most common barriers were convenience and family, 20% and 19% respectively. That's interesting. This is an interesting situation for advocates. Told you. Most meat eaters agree that veganism is healthier, more ethical, and better for the environment, but are unwilling to reduce their meat consumption because they think it will be inconvenient and a sacrifice on taste. Whilst there is something to be said for continuing to highlight these key messages of why people should go vegan, there is also some evidence to support a message focusing on how to go vegan. Humane League Labs found that 34% of the omnivores they surveyed were willing to reduce their animal product consumption, but only 54% of those who were willing knew how to start. Focusing on how to make changes has proved effective in experimental studies too. Humane League Labs found that people who received a pro-vegetarian booklet focused on how to go vegetarian reported diet changes that spared 50% more animals than those who received a booklet focused on why to go vegetarian. Allen and Witt found some supporting evidence in fear-based appeals. When people perceive they have an ability to mitigate a threat, they are most likely to change their behaviour, whereas when they perceive a lack of ability to mitigate the threat, they most likely have a defensive response. Interesting reference I've stuck in there. Was that even about meat consumption? I don't know. By far the most common source of information people use for advice on how to reduce or eliminate animal product consumption is websites. 73% of respondents said websites were a good source of information compared to 58% who said books and 43% who said friends and family. Websites were a great resource, therefore, for people who want to find out more on how to go vegan, but are down the list of resources for what influenced people to reduce their consumption of animal products initially. For this question, the most common resources are documentaries and movies, other, books, thinking of it oneself, and conversation. Websites were influential for just 19%. There's some real good data on that from a big survey of vegans that I think came out after I wrote this. But probably have a look at that survey sometime. There are other decisions to be made regarding message content, in particular how the messages are framed. Accompanying persuasive messages, advocacy materials contain a call to action, for example, go vegan. In recent times, animal advocates with a focus on effectiveness have tested whether some calls to action are more effective than others. Unfortunately, these studies have thus far failed to find significant differences between calls to action. The Animal Welfare Action Lab found no significant difference between a reduce meat message and an eliminate meat message, whilst Humane League Labs found no significant differences between eat vegan, eat vegetarian, eat less meat, or cut back or cut out meat messages. Though they note that the study was underpowered to conclude that these messages are equally effective. Similarly, Mercy for Animals found no significant differences between the messages please choose vegan, please leave animals off your plate, and please cut out or cut back on animal products. Though please choose vegan performed worse than the other two messages. Hey, didn't I just say there's no difference? Okay, no significant difference, though please choose vegan performed worse. Okay, well, not significantly so, I guess. Have we got a troll? Yeah, we do. Our first meathead troll. Well, welcome, Matthew. Stick around. You might learn something. A more fruitful area of research has been on presenting vegan dishes. Humane League Labs found that vegan food was the most appealing cover image for vegetarian literature, and were selected more than images of people or cute animals. In a separate study, they also found that omnivores found familiar dishes such as roast potatoes, pasta with tomato sauce, and garden salads most appealing, whilst tofu, bean soups, and certain vegan meat alternatives were least appealing. Duchenne and Jackson found that people who read about plant-based foods with an emphasis on promoting autonomy and new choices reported a stronger intention to reduce their meat consumption compared to those who read a controlling motivational framing. There's also been some research on producing effective social media advocacy content. Content which arouses strong emotions is most likely to go viral and will therefore reach more people. Mercy for Animals conducted an in-depth analysis of the features of Facebook posts which result in the highest number of people seeing them and identified these 9 rules for dominating Facebook. Post a lot of videos, make people feel strongly, use fewer than 10 words, ask for shares rather than likes or comments, use quotes, link to a news article rather than a blog for more traffic. If it's about an animal, make it a baby animal. Show farmed animals with companion animals, and post memes and photos of food. In a separate study, Mercy for Animals found 3 important factors which made short videos more persuasive: having a narrator rather than just subtitles, having a celebrity narrator, and discussing farmed animal intelligence. Videos with narrators, especially celebrity narrators, were more persuasive than videos with subtitles only, and a comparison of farmed animal intelligence to that of cat or dogs also made videos much more persuasive. Yeah, sort them out, Oppenheimer. Target groups. Okay, so this is section 4 of 5 now. We're going to make it, guys. I'm impressed that 12 people have elected to spend their Saturday afternoon reading a lengthy article from the Vegan Society with me. Thank you, guys. Overall, the best strategy is likely to try and reach as many people as possible. Fauna-lytics find that a surprisingly high proportion of the public claim to care about farm animal welfare. In the US, 73% agree that animals can feel, and around 78% agree that farm animal welfare is important. That's a funny way round for those numbers to be. Why would more people think farm animal welfare is important than people who think that animals can feel? But okay. 54% even agree that farm animals deserve the same consideration as pets, despite the majority of consumers failing. 54%. People are so naive about how farming happens. 54% that farm animals deserve the same consideration as pets. I mean, I agree, right? But that ain't the case. And most of those 54% are not going to be vegans. Despite the majority of consumers failing to connect their meat eating with animal suffering, there is a large group of consumers who are potentially persuadable. Sentience Institute found that 49% of adults would support a ban on factory farming, 47% would support a ban on slaughterhouses, and 33% would support a ban on animal farming. However, despite surprisingly high support for these policies, very few people actually change their diets to reflect these beliefs. There's reasonably good evidence that certain demographic groups are more likely to reduce their animal product consumption than others. Online and social media marketing gives the opportunity to target messages more than ever before, and therefore aiming persuasive messages at the most receptive audiences is a good strategy to maximize the efficiency of campaigns to change consumer behavior. The following are traits which are shown to be associated with higher rates of vegetarian or veganism: being female, being young, liberal or left-leaning, city-dwelling, intelligent or well-educated, higher income. It's basically all the Chad demographics, really. Not following a Judeo-Christian religion, also Chad. LGBT, Chad. Single, Chad. Artistic and introverted. So the main ones, I mean, these are not that surprising, right, in terms of demographics. Young, lefties in cities, mostly women, right? Coastal elites. Intelligent, higher income. All right, let's not rub it in. Vegans are Chads, we get it. Many of these characteristics, such as female, young, and city-dwelling, can be targeted directly through Facebook adverts. This dates it, doesn't it? I mean, I still use Facebook, but I'm a boomer. Others, such as liberal or left-leaning and artistic, may be able to be deduced based on other Facebook interests. Therefore, persuasive adverts encouraging more people to move towards veganism can be effectively targeted at the most receptive demographics. I feel like I repeated myself there, but okay. However, there may be benefits to targeting other demographics too. For example, although women are more likely to give up meat, men consume about 50% more meat than women. Therefore, targeting men has a higher potential number of animals saved. Damn, asparagus. That sucks. If only they stayed cute when they got older, hey? I mean, as I've said before, if, deserving to live is contingent on being sufficiently visually appealing, I know some people who are in trouble. There may also be an argument for targeting communications at current or former vegetarians or vegans. Okay, interesting. Some data shows that 84% of vegetarians and vegans eventually relapse to eating animal products, and a potential reason is a lack of connection with other vegetarians and vegans. Keeping these people motivated, persuading vegetarians to become vegan, or encouraging them to become activists and or donors based are all reasons for targeting current vegetarians and vegans. Yeah, I think, when I was going to start doing YouTube, I thought I could make content that's going to be, persuasive and compelling to get people to go vegan. And then I thought, actually, the higher leverage thing to do is to get people to become activists. It's very difficult to get someone to go vegan. But people who are already vegan are highly committed. They've shown that they are very committed to the cause. They're willing to do something that is, potentially difficult or expensive or socially isolating in order to be true to that. And if we, as the animal movement, don't ask those highly motivated, highly disciplined people to do a little bit more to help the animals that are beyond the ones that they would have eaten, we're missing out on the ability to save way more animals. So I think the highest leverage thing for my communication is to try to talk to people who are already vegans and who might become activists or might become more effective activists. But of course, we do also need, people doing go vegan messaging as well. Meanwhile, 30% of former vegetarians and vegans will eventually go back to vegetarianism and veganism, whilst 37% say they want to. Oh, we'll try to go back to it. Okay. However, animal charity evaluators concluded using data from the same study that reducing recidivism is unlikely to be as cost-effective as traditional forms of vegan outreach, such as leafleting. Okay, reducing recidivism is one thing, but I hadn't quite made the connection for Vegan 2.0 yet at this point when I was writing sort of 6 years ago. And finally, media. This is the last section, guys. And then we, look at that, just have a conclusion section. We'll have made it. There's still 10 people there. Buzzing. I have an audience who will sit on a Saturday afternoon and read with me a lengthy article about effective animal advocacy. That is bloody lovely. I appreciate you, get the hell out of you guys. You're making yourselves better for animals by doing this. We all are. Right, media. There are a variety of forms of media which advocates can use to reach consumers. A key problem is that although images of animal cruelty are amongst the most powerful in changing behaviour, most consumers actively avoid such images. This is an argument for using very public adverts such as billboards, which are difficult to avoid. It's difficult to measure the effectiveness of this kind of strategy, and as such, there is currently no evidence on how effective billboards are at reducing animal product consumption. Well, that is no longer the case, because we recently did a study on billboards. Kind of, it was inconclusive though, so didn't add that much to this. Again, that was mainly about data sources. If we had done that study with the supermarket data, that's the way to do it, really, but it's expensive. However, this tactic does not get around the key hurdle of people avoiding animal cruelty content. Oh, sorry, it does get around the key hurdle. Yeah. So my point here is basically have this situation where the most impactful messages are the animal cruelty messages, but people avoid these images. right? So using some forms of media like billboards and, maybe, well, I'll just say billboards for now, right? They're very difficult to avoid. If that's billboard is on your way to work, right, you are going to look at it. You can try, right, to remember to avoid it, but it's going to be a difficult to avoid reminder to bring this issue to your attention. Some animal rights campaigners may be concerned about bringing attention to particularly cruel farming practices in the media, since this could give the message that animal exploitation would be permissible under better conditions. However, there is good evidence that media coverage of corporate or legislative welfare reforms decreases consumption of animal products. This is a big concern that people have around welfareism. Lusk found that coverage of Prop 2 in California, which banned cages for egg-laying hens, decreased demand for caged eggs and increased demand for cage-free eggs. Presumably beyond California, right? There's people outside of the banned state reading coverage about the banned state and going, oh yeah, okay, that's right. It brings it to people's attention. They switch to cage-free even if they're outside the state. Whilst the overall demand did not change in this case, Tonser and Ulnick found that media coverage around chicken and pig welfare decreased demand for pork and poultry over 10 years. More recently, Mercy for Animals tested this experimentally, again finding that reading about corporate policy reform or legislative reform which improved animal welfare decreases intentions to buy the relevant animal products. Moreover, Faunalytics found that 73% of the public support using media to reach the public with animal protection messages. Therefore, advocacy organisations committed to animal rights rather than welfare should still celebrate and encourage such welfare reforms and boost their media coverage where possible. So this is a bit different from the point that I usually make these days about welfare reforms, which is that it increases the cost of farming, therefore reduces the number of animals farmed through that method. This is saying that actually media generated from animal welfare policies being changed basically reminds people, you got to get in the mindset, most people do not think about eating animals at all. I think about it every day, all day. I'm thinking about this issue, right? But most people think about factory farming maybe once a year. So basically any story that might get that in the papers, hey, there's going to be slightly bigger cages on factory farms now, for most people that's going to be just like a reminder that this is something that happens, and some of those people are there going to go on to reduce their consumption, which is great. Overall, the evidence suggests that leafleting can lead to dietary change for a small number of people. Humane League Labs observed that about 2% of those who received a vegan advocacy leaflet reported that they became vegetarian or pescatarian as a result. Animal charity evaluators found that people who received a vegan leaflet reported a significantly higher reduction in animal product consumption compared to those who received a control leaflet. However, Humane League Labs found no significant difference between those who received an advocacy leaflet and those who did not. I guess this is a different study. Oh. Okay, maybe it's the same study. They found 2% of vegetarian or vegan, but that wasn't different from the control group. Okay. Overall, these findings suggest the effect of leafleting is quite small, though it likely does have a positive impact. The evidence regarding online adverts is similarly weak overall. Faunalytics found some effect of watching adverts about the environment, health, or ethics, finding that animal ethics messages were the most compelling. Similarly, Humane League Labs found a difference in the rate of young women ordering vegetarian literature after watching two different videos, 1.5% versus 2.7%. Oh my goodness, I was on mute the whole time. Sorry, guys. Lol. Thank you for putting that in the chat. What a loser. All right, I'll reread that last paragraph because I missed it. Indeed, Humane League Labs report that in a sample of mostly vegetarians and vegans, 53% reduced or eliminated their meat consumption after seeing printed farmed animal cruelty material such as leaflets, whereas 59% reduced or limited their meat consumption after seeing farm animal cruelty videos. They also found that when asked to choose 3 resources which were most influential in leading them to start reducing animal product consumption, 16% said online videos were most influential, 11% said social media was influential, and just 7% said leaflets were influential. The most commonly cited source of influence in this survey were conversation, thinking of it themselves, books, other, and documentaries, movies. Yeah, the gym bros. That's a good idea. Yeah, targeting meat eaters with a targeting gym eaters with a swap chicken for Satan message. Yeah, that's very true. Okay. So there you've got the different sources of influence that people cite. Documentaries coming top of the list. Given the dominance of documentaries and movies as a source of influence for creating vegans, advocates should seriously consider paying people to watch these films. This has been done before in the UK, and although there is no formal evidence for its effectiveness, advocates who have carried out this intervention report many viewers refusing the money afterwards and asking lots of questions about veganism. Humane League Labs also found that although websites were not a prominent source for persuading people to go vegan, they were the most common source for informing people how and keeping them motivated. This suggests that animal advocacy websites, which are likely mainly visited by people who are already persuaded that action is necessary, should focus on practical advice on how to go vegan and information about how vegans are making a difference, rather than arguments of why people should go vegan. Although social media was not reported as a main source of influencing consumers to reduce their consumption of animal products, it does offer a uniquely precise platform for targeting the most receptive audience. In an analysis of 1,600 animal advocacy Facebook posts, Mercy for Animals gave 9 rules for dominating Facebook for farmed animals. More recently, they published a cross-platform analysis of all social media content and reiterated the conclusion that Facebook dominates social media and videos dominate Facebook. Again, dating this piece a little bit, right? This printed in 2019. Other key lessons from these analyses are to post emotive content and ask for shares rather than likes or comments. The shares rather than likes or comments are going to be a little bit dependent on platform. I know on LinkedIn it really privileges comments. So when you get people commenting on your LinkedIn post, that's actually does better than shares, weirdly. Finally, Carfora, Casso, and Connor have demonstrated that SMS reminders are an effective intervention for those who want to reduce their meat consumption. A daily text message focused on anticipated regret resulted in a significantly higher reduction in processed meat consumption compared to a control group. A similar intervention could be useful for new vegans to keep them motivated. You get some nice, happy chickens because you joined me all the way to the end. In conclusion, consumer-facing campaigns can help to alleviate the most animal suffering by adhering to these general rules. On strategy, campaigns should focus on farmed animals rather than animals in shelters or labs, simply because of the sheer number of animals involved. Furthermore, advocates should be aware that fish and chickens make up over 99% of farmed animals in the UK and suffer more than other farmed animals and should be prioritised accordingly. Message content. Animal cruelty messages are the most effective at changing consumer behaviour on aggregate, though some consumers may find health or environmental messages more compelling. Though fish account for the majority of farmed animal suffering, they are the least persuasive species to use in advocacy materials. Advocates should be wary that health or environmentally motivated consumers may reduce red meat consumption and replace it with white meat, which would lead to more animal suffering. Target groups. It is possible to persuade a wide range of consumers, and the best overall strategy is to reach as many people as possible. However, there are some demographics who are particularly receptive to the vegan message, namely women, left-leaning, city dwellers, well-educated, and high income, aka gigachats. There is mixed evidence of the effectiveness of leafleting and online advertising. However, social media posts can be optimized to reach more people and be more effective at changing behavior. While websites are a good medium for giving information on how to go vegan, documentaries appear to be the most common source of influence for vegans. Advocates could consider paying people to watch these documentaries and/or displaying billboards in difficult-to-avoid places. Though there is no evidence on the effectiveness of these strategies, they may address major limitations of traditional forms of advocacy. Text message reminders for motivated meat reducers are also likely to be an effective means of reducing meat consumption. There we go, guys. We read all that. Well done. Well done, us. I appreciate you joining me for that. And spending your Saturday afternoon on learning about effective animal campaigning. I'm going to show you the table that I thought was in here. Vegan Society. What's the other article called? It's called Persuasive Overcome Avoidance. Yeah, here we go. So this is like a bit of a follow-up that I wrote, just amplifying that part about how animal cruelty messages are the most important. And this is the table that I was thinking about. I'll post this in the chat because this is going to be, I don't doubt, an empirical question that people here will like to discuss a lot. Yeah, non-human animal messages are persuasive, robust, well-aligned, and lead to long-term change. There's a bunch of studies here. So there's a table of studies that are these kind of experimental things comparing different types of messages. Pamphlet about non-human animal cruelty were most likely to change their eating habits. Those who saw a video about non-human animal cruelty were the most likely to report intentions to reduce their non-human animal product consumption. They've done a control F on animal for non-human animal here. Those who saw leaflets focused on non-human animal cruelty were most likely to give their email address to receive a veg starter guide. Those who read non-human animal cruelty essays and discussed essays reported the largest difference in appeal between a meat option and a vegetarian option, larger than those who had read a health essay or an environment essay. Leaflets about non-human animals subsequently reported dietary decisions which saved more non-human animals than a health leaflet. Text messages focused on an emotional message caused a decrease in meat consumption, but an informative message did not, so similar. Those who saw a tagline highlighting the non-human animal and environmental benefits of the plant-based option reported the strongest preference for plant-based option compared to those who saw a tagline about taste similarity or relative healthiness. Those who read an article about non-human animal environmental benefits or health benefits were equally more likely to choose a plant-based option compared to a control. Okay, so no difference there. I think what I've done is bolded the most effective ones, including in cases where they are tied. So there's a few here where there's some other outcome, right? But for the most part, advertisers dependent on non-human animal suffering received a click-through rate more than twice as high as health or environment or social-related ads. So this table is basically a comparison of a bunch of those studies, which pretty consistently find the most persuasive messages are the animal ones. Yeah, thank you, Asparagus. I appreciate you being here. I'm really pleased that I'm, streaming this kind of content and that people are into it because, yeah, this is what I've worked on for a long time, and I have to say I'm a little bit surprised so many people were up for going through this lengthy report on a Saturday afternoon with me, but I really appreciate it, and maybe I shouldn't be surprised that people in my community have a high commitment to making themselves better vegan activists. But in any case, very proud, very very, my heart is very full at this moment, as Michael Scott says. Been watching up The Office. Right, guys, I think that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you guys a lot. I'll post the link to my Discord one more time, which is dsc.gg/ChrisBryantPhD. Not like that, I won't. dsc.gg/ChrisBryantPhD. Oh, blimey, can't type. Nice. There you go. So, you know, if you want to continue on the discourse, come on over to the Discord. But yeah, I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll put up a video of some of these things. And I will most likely stream again tomorrow. And we've got to finish watching the Paul Wood debate, so that'll be good fun. Good content to come. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, guys, and thank you again for joining me this afternoon. Appreciate you all. Bye.